Whoa. I feel as if I could go home now. I might be better served. Well, good evening, everyone. Well, it is a pleasure to be here and to have been invited as a guest of the Burian Lecture Series from the College of Health and Human Services. And by the way, I am so glad that you introduced the former dean's wife, because when I was in Dean Early's office today, I looked at her wall, and on the wall in her office is this fabulous hanging that is a combination of yarn pieces, it looks like, and it is just beautiful. So if you have an opportunity, go in and see it. I've been to Kalamazoo before, and I see some of the people whom I met here earlier this year and today. And hello to the women of Delta Sigma Theta. Hello to the women of Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated. Building bridges. Well, building bridges seems to have summed up my life, particularly in the city of Lansing. However, it's been my experience as an educator that if you really want to see sharing, helpfulness, cooperation, and togetherness, regardless of race, creed, socioeconomic status, etc., just watch a bunch of high school students getting ready for a final. Their only criteria for excellence is who's got the answer. But communities that are thought to be successful ones have four components that make them so: good housing for its people, good education for its people, good health care, and economic development. Taken together, these four serve all of the basic human needs, if you think about it for a moment. Any one of them that is missing and the community is not served as well as it could be. In my judgment, building bridges is a matter of intellect and a matter of the heart. I say a matter of the heart because building bridges implies the entire community, and no sector of the community gets lost or can't be found if you really look for it. Now, building bridges is a social science. It really isn't a hard science, as it were. But there is research in the field, and the research in the field shows that communities are built on connections. Better connections actually provide better opportunities for the citizens of that community. I came to know bridge building and the value of it and leveraging your strength through partnerships back in the day. How many of you in the room remember something called the millage? Okie dokie. See, Michael's too young for the millage. But in any case, the millage for young people, before the state was responsible for sponsoring all of education, in a community, you went out and developed a campaign to sponsor the millage. So I was a very young person at the quote-unquote central office of the Lansing School District, and I learned that it was necessary to work with every community in that city if you wanted your millage campaign to be successful. Your livelihood as an educator depended upon the successful passage of the millage. And the nexus of all of our activities began with, where are we now? Where do we want to be? How do we get there? And let's go. Now, we did not listen to a maxim by Ross Perot who said, if you run into a venomous snake, don't build a committee on snakes, just kill it. Well, we built lots of committees. The committee took the efforts of the entire educational community to ensure its passage and to minimize the threat of failure. A millage, by the way, was equal to 1/10 of 1% of the value of the entire community. And if you had a General Motors, for example, in your hometown, you can imagine the value of the property in our community. Well, otherwise, your whole school financing depended upon whatever you could get for the state, whatever the base student allowance was for the state of that year. So you had to go out and pass the millage because the state never in those days gave, what am I eating in those days? The state never gave you enough money to support everything that was going on in the schools. So we had to connect. Part of the community had children in school, others did not. And when we thought about really what we were doing, we knew this was a serious enterprise. We knew that it required serious effort. We needed to provide forums for the people of the community to share their thoughts with us. We wanted to encourage what was a viable democratic process, and we were interested in dialogue between the community and us, because we listened to the community for creativity, how we could do this big thing called the millage, since the entire public schools were resting on how successful we could be, as well as we listened to their ideas for solving some of the issues that we heard raised in other places. We understood that there were some key questions in this community building process that we were after. Are the right connections in place? Who is in the leadership roles in your community? Who are the experts in process, planning, and practice? Who are the mentors in your community that others seek out? Who are the innovators? Are there ideas shared and acted upon? Are there collaborative alliances between business in your community? Business never wanted to see additional taxes or anything of that sort, so it was important to court the businesses of our communities and what businesses provided a better return on investment. As you can guess, as educators, we had the traditional support system already in place, like the PTAs and the PTSAs, the band boosters and the sports enthusiasts and so on. And of course, we had the Board of Education and its constituents. But we had to brainstorm not just people that we knew, because communities are 3 and 4 and 5 layers deep, if you think about it. And so we tried to connect all of these disparate groups for the single purpose of passing the millage. I didn't know there were so many groups in Lansing. By the way, if you hear me call Lansing the Big L, you will know that I'm talking about the city of Lansing. Nobody else knows that, but you're in on my secret about the Big L. We had to merge all of these disparate groups into some sort of a pattern that would allow us to manage our time and our resources most effectively. We had to know who knows whom, and if you know your network, as you should know it, attention can be focused on where you spend the predominance of your effort. Networking is not always an easy task. We learned that the hard way. But lamenting on how much work was involved got you absolutely nowhere. We knew we had to reach out and engage as much of the Lansing community as we could identify, or run the risk of alienating a potential source of support. Guess what's true about us as Americans? We like to be involved. So that meant talking with large sections of Lansing for long periods of time. Those of you who know your Alex de Tocqueville knows that he said that we're a busy, busy nation. He traveled in the late 1700s throughout America trying to explore what is this democracy that this country is talking so much about, a new experiment in the world. Well, they're not even letting a king tell them what to do. But he learned in a New England town meeting, for example, that he said, we just sort of understood that there would be dissonance on any subject anywhere, anytime, with each speaker demanding his or her own idea of what was satisfactory. Try to pass the millage, and that comes home very quickly to you. So here we are building bridges, networking, hoping we're making a difference. And we looked at ourselves and said, well, now what are we doing? What do we have here? We learned a couple of things. Number one, birds of a feather flock together. Well, what we learned about that was that groups link together. They have common attributes, they have a common governance system, or there's something that causes them to link together. So we knew about those groups. Second thing we learned, diversity. Diversity in a group is very important. We learned a third thing. If you don't know how to get to that group one way, you better figure out another way to get to that group. Some groups are more important than others. Remember Animal Farm? Some groups are more important than others. They're critical to the effort that you're trying to do. Without that group and its influence, you may or may not be successful. And most groups in a network are kind of loosely connected. I had some AV things that I was going to show about that, but they looked like stars, so I just let them alone. Anyway, diversity, I want to hit that one more time. Diversity is important because if you don't have it, you're back to birds of a feather that all flock together, and you don't get a continuum of points of view. I think that's fairly obvious. You don't know where all the dissonance will be coming from if you don't. And even if everyone that you want to influence and help you pass the millage isn't a part of the core group, you ought not to be too far from anybody that you're trying to reach. I learned that the hard way. I was chair of the campaign for the United Way in Lansing. And I really didn't know very much about how a factory worked. But what I did know was that General Motors had, if you were to do an analysis of the workforce in Lansing, more people worked for General Motors at that time than any single entity. And if you did an analysis of the financial structure of the Lansing community, you would know that General Motors had more money than any other entity in the community. And when you're working on the United Way, you look at your community and say, we have a campaign worth X number of millions of dollars that we're trying to raise. So we can't have a campaign if General Motors is not in it. And they have learned that, unfortunately, in Lansing, because General Motors moved its headquarters from Lansing to Detroit. And that took out a whole band of resources for the United Way. It was a very serious matter. But in any case, I didn't know very much about the factory floor. And the way General Motors had divided itself to run the United Way campaign was that every section of whatever they were building had a captain. And that captain was responsible for collecting all the money on the floor. So I had a phone call in my office to call whomever this gentleman was. And it took me a little bit of time to get back to him, to my dismay. I really should have gone right ahead and called him back. But in addition to passing the millage and working in that campaign, we did have a day job as well. So when that gentleman got me on the phone, he gave me a serious education about the way industry works and why it was important for me to get back to him, because he was the floor captain and I was trying to get this money raised for the Capital Area United Way. Well, picture me humble. I was immediately humble. And I did apologize, but sometimes things are outside of your sphere of influence to deal with, and I just explained, I'm so sorry, sir. if you'll just please get your floor organized and as many other floors as you can, that would be great. He implied, he said it right out, that if I were too important to talk to him. And I assured him, no, sir, I certainly was not. So you can't be too far away from the people that you're trying to influence. Anyway, he was confused about something, and he had a mixed message, and he wanted to clear it up with me. So, if you don't have a way in your bridge building exercises and your work with the poor, if you don't have a way to hear all of those people, figure it out. Or else you'll miss some valuable information somewhere along in there. So, networking, if you think about it, I think of these as synonyms. Bridge building, networking, building connections, all of those things are synonyms for the same activity, the same thought process. I'm trying to get to people for a purpose. Well, we had a common process in trying to get to the millage for people to pass in Lansing, and people understood the importance of it. Not everybody agreed, and at least one time we were unsuccessful and had to go back and do the millage all over again, because all communities don't agree as we would here in a lecture hall series in a world-class university. They don't all agree on the value of education, particularly if it's something that they have to pay for. So we didn't always pass the millage first time out of the gate, but we worked hard at it and we got better at it, and then the state began to fund education, just as we were really good millage makers. But if you think passing the millage is something, I was engaged once in Lansing with a community building exercise wherein each section of Lansing that could be identified participated in what was called, what would be a shared vision of Lansing. And I remember the exercise being one in which the people were grouped in circles, 10 or 12 different circles of people. And you could put your idea on the table. If you had an idea in education, health, housing, police, fire, the mayor, teachers, whatever, trash, you name it. And for the idea to reach to the top of this continuum, it had to be something that everybody in the group had to agree was significant, or else it didn't get anywhere. Now, this was a wonderful idea, but when you involve the whole community, you ought to be ready for what you get. Not everyone listens. And for an old educator, if you're not listening, it's like, what? I'm a teacher. Well, first of all, not everybody listens. Most don't agree and will tell you so at the top of their voice. Lots of people say, no. You say, but this is good. No. Lots of community people won't compromise. So I'm thinking, but this is Lansing, where we do things together. Wrong. So in building this shared vision, or building bridges in this instance, it required a very strong, intelligent leader to work. I asked him this morning in the college, how many of you remember Howard Wolpe in this community? Well, Howard Wolpe was leading our community building activity, and he was very good, but I'm sure he was a lot older when he finished. He seemed to know, though, when to accept something, when to reject it, and the differences in the authenticity of their remarks. But it was tough. This was a prime example, really, of pulling together the scattered fragments that are in a community. But I'm here about the university Empowerment Center at the College of Health and Human Services, and their complex mission of a call to action, poverty reduction in Kalamazoo County. Interesting. I know this from listening to them. They are trying to put the right connections in place. They are trying to discern the leadership roles in Kalamazoo. They're trying to look for who are the experts in process, in planning, and practice. The first place that they took me to when I came here was the Kalamazoo Promise. Do you all know what that is? The Kalamazoo Promise? Oh my, I was so impressed and gratified by what the Kalamazoo Promise does. What a model to present to Ernie Duncan, for example, the health and the education expert for this current administration. My heart skipped a beat when I heard all that the Kalamazoo Promise does. Imagine being guaranteed that when you were ready to go to college, you could go and your tuition would be paid. Shoot, my mother could have bought a whole bunch of stuff if that had been the case when I was a child. What we do know about poverty is throughout the history of America, there is one constant upon which we can all agree, and that is the need and value of a good education. It was Thomas Jefferson who said, you know, we won't be able to govern ourselves as a democratic nation unless we know how to read, write, think. Otherwise, the king may as well tell you what to do. So it was he who first saw the need for a public education system. I know the value of an education as an African American because for hundreds of years we were denied the value of an education for fear of upsetting the status quo. So, whether or not the people that we know take advantage of it and do with it what we should, we still know the value of an education. The students in Kalamazoo need only one, be a student in the Kalamazoo Public Schools, live in the boundaries of Kalamazoo, and go through high school in Kalamazoo to be eligible for this award. 100% of your college tuition is guaranteed if you do. If you go to a university, they will sponsor you for 10 years, or until you get 130 credit hours, or until you earn a baccalaureate. Or you can go to a trade school, or you can go to a community college and learn a skill. What an incentive to go on. 2 weeks ago, I was in Huntsville, Alabama, and last weekend in Kansas City. And I told both of those communities about the Kalamazoo Promise. Imagine that being replicated across American cities and towns. We would have the best educated population on the planet if we did. And imagine the worry that takes for all the people who save pennies and nickels in fruit jars to send their children to school. I am so appreciative to the philanthropic community here who not only had that vision, but put their money where their mouth was. They are anonymous, and that's good, but I can't tell you the value of that single entity and the entire continuum of what will reduce poverty in your community. I don't think that schools can do it alone. They need a community. As a matter of fact, I was thinking about something that I read from the National Education Association, and it reads, too many policymakers, community leaders, and even parents still view schools and student learning as the sole responsibility of educators. While educators take their professional responsibilities seriously, they also realize they can't do it alone. They need and depend on the support from parents and community members. In Kalamazoo, I saw the superintendent here give a big hug to some people that I know would be valuable, because what I learned when I was at the Kalamazoo Promise is that there is a dearth of Latino young men and African American young men. That's a serious matter to me. And I know that I looked at the strategic planning of the Kalamazoo Public Schools, and I know that one of the elements of it is community support. But I worked in education long enough to know that if you don't have the community with you, and moms and dads who get out and help you, then you could teach, I don't know what, in a classroom, but when the youngster leaves the classroom, then he's at the mercy of whatever the elements are out there. So, but there are groups in Kalamazoo who can help with this, I believe, help with this concern of the dearth of African American and Latino young men not being represented very well in that Kalamazoo Promise. And another thing that I heard when I was at the Kalamazoo Promise, and that was this, that some people thought that the Kalamazoo Promise was only for low-income and poor people. And so they didn't want to be in it. Wrong. Excuse me. That's not correct. The Kalamazoo Promise is for every child that goes to the Kalamazoo schools. So, let's stop the myths, get to the reality, and get busy doing something. I can recall that when I worked in the Lansing schools, we had serious problems, but one of the things I did one day was call the NAACP and ask them, hey, what if we co-signed an invitation for all the African American parents in the Lansing schools? Now, I could get their names and numbers because I could just say pull some mailing labels down and give them to me. You say, well, why African Americans? Because that's where the problems were. Not just because I'm African American, but that's where the concerns were. So I said, let's pull all of those names and let's invite every African American parent in the Lansing School District to come over and meet with us. I knew that the NAACP was a credible organization. And when I partnered with them, I was more likely to get attention paid to what I was after. So I did that. And on a Saturday morning, we had as many as came, and there were in excess of 250 to 300 people there. So they came, and you know what? You'd be surprised how much goodwill you can buy with a donut at 8 o'clock in the morning. So while they were there, we talked about this value of education, and people who would say, well, you know, I'm doing the best I can. I just can't he just won't do as I ask him to do. So one of the people there said, listen, tell him like Muhammad Ali said, I hated every minute of training, but I said, suffer now and live the rest of your life as a champion. You tell him to get busy. But we had the moms and dads there, and 60 Minutes had shown a video about a little old school in rural Mississippi called the Piney Woods School. And that school graduated 90% Of all the people who came there, and 87% went to college and 80% finished. So, I showed the film from Piney Woods. But Piney Woods was strict. And so, as a matter of fact, Dr. Beatty, who was the president of that school, had gone to MSU. So Piney Woods was a strict school. And they were all over us about the number of suspensions for boys and girls in Lansing schools. So I said, okay. Dr. Beatty, there was a girl that went home for the Christmas holidays, and she came back pregnant. And she was a senior there. And there was a lot of crying and a lot of sincere apologies. But you know what he did? He sent her home. He said, that's not what we're trying to do at this school. We're trying to build a different kind of citizen than that. Now, that was, of course, in the early 90s. Public schools may or may not have that luxury. But when it was over, I talked to those parents about I asked them, I didn't talk to them. I asked them, what did you think of that strict discipline there at Piney Woods? What is it that you want your children to do in the Lansing schools? And how can we help you do it? Would you help us do it? And we divided them into groups, of course, and I said, there are only 3 questions that I want you to talk about. Number 1, if the Lansing schools were doing as well as they could do for all of the children in the district, what would we be doing? What would the teachers be doing? What would the administrators be doing? And so on. If your child were doing the best that he could do or she could do in the Lansing schools, what would they be doing? And if you, as a parent with a child going to school, were doing the best that you could do, what would you be doing? Well, that created a little consternation. But when we got down to the brass tacks of it, you would be amazed at, well, maybe you wouldn't be amazed at their responses. Because the truth was this, after you sorted it out for the people who gave politically correct responses and those who hated the schools, somewhere in there rested the heart of the matter. Everybody there wanted their child to do better than they could do. That was one thing that we called out. Everybody there would say that whatever it is we can do at home, if I just had some help, I could do this or that or the other. Everybody there, particularly if they had a boy, implored us to form a partnership with, guess who? The Lansing Police Department. To talk with the Lansing Police as a school district to see how we could somehow have them talk with parents so they could understand the fear that they had when their boy was perhaps out late at night. But we did the things that they asked us to do. We made a booklet of it, gave it back of what they said they wanted to do and their responses. We made a pamphlet. We gave it back to them. We gave it to the Board of Education. We gave it to the principals in the school, and we gave it to anybody that would listen. And then we tried to check off what it was they had asked us to do and check off what they said they would do. Now, our motives were to create a better atmosphere in the Lansing schools because we had just gone through school desegregation. So we were trying to create an atmosphere there that was welcoming to all people. But sometimes people you don't see can be very helpful to the enterprise that you're trying to work with. Most people would not have seen some of the parents that came there that day, but they were really helpful to us. We wanted to somehow build a bridge with those parents to say, we are for you. We're not against you. We're for you. We want to do our job. Well, weaving a network is not just schmoozing. There's value in it. There's value in reaching across communities. Second place I visited here in Kalamazoo was the Douglas Community Center. How many of you know that? Where that is? Okay. The Douglas Community Action Center was a marvelous visit. There is a young lady there. I hope she doesn't mind my calling her name. It's Sherry Thomas Cloud. And you talk about a network weaver. Boy, she was putting herself together in network. I think the center, as she talked to me about it, had fallen on hard times. It was not the wonderful place. It still was a wonderful place. The idea of it was wonderful, but it wasn't the place that she remembered it being. And so she was setting about building a networking structure to help develop this Douglas Community Center. In Lansing, we had a similar place called the Lincoln Center. And some of our most prominent African American people came out of that center. One is now the president of Michigan State University's Board of Trustees and a very, very influential builder in the state of Michigan. One is an entrepreneur, businessman, the first African American lobbyist for an automobile dealership. Those young men came out of that center. Helen Mickens is another good friend of mine. She's at the Cooley Law School, but she's a native of Kalamazoo. And she and I her dad was a judge here in Kalamazoo. And she and I were talking, and she said, oh, I remember that center. My dad put so many hours in helping to build that center. The point is this. The Douglas Center is a part of Kalamazoo's promise. Young men go there to play basketball. They go there to get information on this, that, and the other. Young men and women in the community. That's part of your promise as a community, whether it's in your radar or not. It is a part of this great community. Well, and the third place I visited was the Community Promise Federal Credit Union. The what? Well, the Community Promise Federal Credit Union. Its motto is helping Kalamazoo build wealth, safe and affordable services that you can trust. There is no doubt, of course, that one way to help poor people to get out of poverty is access to capital. And I don't want to hear money and everything. I know money isn't poverty. That I do know. Mr. Jim Houston is the CEO of this. No, he's not the CEO. He's the board chair of this enterprise. And what he has done is for those persons who are not in the mainstream that can go to the established financial institutions and get help, he's created a way for them to come there and get help. Now, they have to work. They have to be able to pay the money back over time. But he has what he calls hump loans, getting you over the hump of different things. When you can't get money because your car broke down, when you cannot get money to repair a roof that has leaked in your home, that's what that credit union is for. It has passed all of the hurdles that are put in front of financial institutions. They're not hurdles, they're protections, really. It is a part of the Michigan Credit Union League, and the National Credit Union Association. Mr. Houston is a retired business person. He worked in corporate America for a long time, so he has knowledge and experience. His goal was to create a financial institution where families and individuals who have little or no relationship with mainstream financial institutions could have access to smaller loans. He said he came to it because what he had seen cropping up in different communities in Kalamazoo was those payday lenders and they come in and give me half your check to cash your check. He had saw a lot of those cropping up in Kalamazoo, and it troubled him because he knows nobody knows better than a poor person how expensive it is to be poor. Do you know that? So he didn't want that to continue with poor people in Kalamazoo. So that is his way of meeting one of those things that makes a good community. And finally, but certainly not least, I went to the Health and Human Services Department of Western Michigan University, who are doing a phenomenal job, it seems to me, and using their academic disciplines to examine how they can interact with the varying communities of Kalamazoo. And you know you have, as I said, 3 and 4 and 5 layers and communities. Among the charges of this university, in general, of any university, is research and the creation of new knowledge. That's what a university does. And so I'm just going to be excited when your university, along with the Empowerment Center, has come to, when you've built all of your bridges and you've made the right connections in Kalamazoo. I want to see another college in your university take a look at all the things that you have done and network and help you examine and see how they can be of service to Greater Kalamazoo. It isn't just the College of Health and Human Services who ought to be in the business of helping reducing poverty in Kalamazoo. You've got this world-class institution here. It should also be helping, because one of the things that I noticed in your world-class institution, and I know that it is, every part of it had networking, collaboration, and building bridges in its strategic mission. Its mission and values included those things. So perhaps you will get some collaboration within to help you do what it is you're trying to do to reduce poverty here in the city of Kalamazoo. Those things that a great community has. It has housing for its people. It has health care for its people. It has education for its people. And it has economic development for its people. I'm not sure here in the city of Kalamazoo, I haven't been here long enough to know who pulls all of this together. I read the Chamber of Commerce's strategic plan. It has collaboration. I read the City of Kalamazoo's strategic plan. It has collaboration. I read the school district's strategic plan. It has collaboration. And the university's strategic plan with collaboration. Who pulls that together? That is a legitimate question. Who pulls it all together? Is it the mayor? Is it the council? I'm not sure. But somebody should. Otherwise, your silos remain. You're all out there doing great things, but they don't connect anywhere. So, I hope that the next time I come to the city of Kalamazoo, Dean Early is going to be telling me, this is what we did, and this is how we did, and we collaborated with Michael Rice, and we collaborated with the Chamber of Commerce, and we are no longer poor. And by the way, this is a disturbing little statistic for me. Did you know that you have a 30% poverty rate here in Kalamazoo? I wouldn't have thought so. I certainly would not have thought so. When I read that, I went back again. I said, wait a minute, what's up with that? I didn't say what's up with that. I wondered why that is so. Even with all this wonderfulness, there is a 30% poverty rate. I hope you will do all of the things that are necessary to build this wonderful community. I hope that you will do them with thought, deliberation, not too hastily. Do them thoughtfully. And come to everybody sitting in front of me has something to give to that enterprise. First of all of you have an education. That's one. Secondly, you have presumably time and energy. You're here, so presumably you have that. But if I were you, I would get in where I fit in to help this enterprise and be cautious about doing it. May I read you a funny story? I just read this yesterday and I thought it was hilarious. This is about caution. It says, a fire broke out in a small Midwestern town. The owner of the property called the local fire department, and they came roaring out immediately. The heat was intense, and the fire was spreading quickly through the vast woods and toward the barn, all of his equipment and toward his farmhouse. The owner said to the fire chief, I'll give you $10,000 if you put out that fire. And the fire chief looked at the out-of-control blaze, and he said, no way, I just don't think that we can do that. And they took off. And quickly the owner called another fire chief in another village. And they came out. And by now the fire had spread to the barn. And he said, listen, I'll give you $10,000 if you will put out this fire. He said, I'm so sorry. It's out of our control. This is a big blaze. No way. And desperate, he called a third fire department. And this single truck came roaring out and the heart of the blaze, and the men began fighting the fire. After a monumental battle, they put the fire out. They saved most of the property. They emerged, burned up and smoky, choking and exhausted. The owner walked up to the brave fire chief, his clothes blackened and torn, and he said, you guys were terrific. I made a promise, and I'm going to keep it. For what you did, here is a check for $10,000. Then he said to the fire chief, okay, so what do you think you're going to do with all that money? And he said, well, first I'm going to get the brakes fixed on this truck.